Okay, we're back in part 3 here. We're talking about continuation. Once you've finished activating a formation, you select a second leader, and it can't be the same one that just finished, and you can try to dice against his activation rating to try to continue to move your army around. If you're successful, you get to move that formation, do all your movement with him, engage in combat, shot combat. Then you can try continuation again, and this can perpetually go on and on. However, after your first continuation, there is a +1 die roll modifier for each other successful continuation. So let's say I move with Sakman. I continue with this guy from Haran. If I wanted to try continuation again, there would be a +1 die roll modifier. So let's say I chose Sakman for the next continuation. I'm successful there. Okay, now I want to continue again. I can't use Sakman, so I'm going to bounce back over here from this guy from Haran. And now there's going to be a +2 die roll modifier. So eventually what's going to happen is the die roll modifiers are going to be such that you will fail your continuation roll. When you fail a continuation roll, the other player may freely select any of his formations and activate that formation. At which point they do all their movement, shooting, all that, and then they can try to continue and so forth. Now, the wrinkle in this whole business is that you can actually, before your opponent tries continuation, the opponent can try what's called seizure. So let's say for a moment here, I moved with Sakman, and I moved all these Turkoman light cavalry. Let's say I did all that. Before I try continuation, the Crusader player could take someone like Baldwin of Edessa and try seizure. To seize the initiative, you have to roll less than or equal to that particular leader's activation rating. So I'd have to roll a 0 through 3 on a 10-sided die for Baldwin to be activated. If I'm successful, then the other guy does not get an opportunity to attempt continuation. Now the rub is this. If I try seizure and fail, then the other player that I tried to seize from may have a free activation, which means he can activate any one of his formations, including the one that just finished activating. So this is a decision that's got to be taken very carefully, because if I take Sakman and activate him, I'd love to activate him again, get a back-to-back activation. So if my opponent tries seizure and fails, then I would be able to do so, but I could not voluntarily do it simply by trying continuation. So sometimes an opponent will intentionally not try to seize, hoping that his opponent will fail a continuation roll, thus allowing him to activate a formation that would be difficult to try seizure with. For example, this guy here, Jocelyn here, the sub-commander for Baldwin's army, he's the infantry commander and his activation rating is 2. So you probably wouldn't want to try seizure with him because you'd only have a 30% chance of success. So usually the only time you're going to activate him is when your opponent has failed continuation, thus giving you a free activation. So that is the command system of the game. So with that in mind, let's just go ahead and just start playing here. What I'm going to go ahead and do is activate all these Turkoman light cavalry, and they got a movement rating of 8. So these guys are going to bounce all over the map. So let's move this guy along. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Stream has no effect. 6, 7, and 8. Now once he enters his hex, the archers in this game have a 2-hex range, unlike Men of Iron, where the longbowmen had a much longer range. So we're going to go ahead and move here, and we're going to take a pot shot at the knights. Now here's where archery really shows its weakness in the game against these armored knights. There's some modifiers that are going to apply. There's going to be a -1 modifier to the archers for firing at a 2-hex range. So if you played Men of Iron, you know that the archers in that game had a 3-hex range, and at 1 hex they were just truly lethal. In this game, they're +1 at a range of 1, and -1 at a range of 2. So they're either really good or really bad. The other modifier that would apply here is if you have mounted archers firing, there's a -1 modifier. And if you're firing at knights or heavy cavalry are only fielded by the Muslim armies. The Crusaders always have knights. So firing at a range of 2 hexes, there's a -1 modifier for that. -1 because these guys are mounted archers. and -1 again because they're firing at night. So there's a -3 modifier, and they have to roll at least a 5 in order to disorder a mounted target that is not already disordered. So he's going to go ahead and chuck a 10-sided die, and he rolls a 0, so it's a big whiff. He fails his die roll to inflict any harm. When this happens, knights are very impetuous, just like in Men of Iron. There is a possibility now that this knight will countercharge the archer that fired at him. So to do that, there's a chart on the that's not in the vassal module. And what you're going to do is you're going to roll on this chart to find out if the knight's countercharge. And what it is what you're going to do is you're going to throw a 10-sided die, and you're going to add the countercharging unit shock defense die roll modifier. So this particular knight here that was the target, he's got a modifier of 0, so nothing's going to happen there. And basically, if he rolls a 5 or greater, nothing happens. And he rolls a 2. So because he rolled less than or equal to a 4, he is successful and will countercharge. So he's going to move up, and we will put a countercharge marker on him. Let's see here. Actually, I'm not seeing one in here. Let's see if there's one in the pieces tray. Because you can only countercharge once. Here we go. We'll put this marker on him to show that he is countercharged. When this happens, he countercharges light cavalry, but light cavalry in the game have their own special use. They have no ability to commit shock combat, so they cannot shock attack at all in the game. Their only use is their missile fire and their mobility. And it's deceptive because you would think, these guys are very, very weak, but actually they're quite strong when they're used in great numbers like this. Here's what's going to happen. He can try to retreat before the countercharge. So what he's going to do is he's going to roll a die, and he's going to add his shock defense die roll modifier, which happens to be a +1. And his die roll modifier is a 9, which becomes a 10. And according to the light cavalry retreat before countercharge table, he is not allowed to retreat, and the countercharge is immediately resolved. So this knight is now going to commit shock attack, even though it's not the Crusader player's turn. So out of turn, he's going to do a shock combat, and it's going to happen in the middle of the Muslim activation. And to do this, it's a real simple system. It's even more simple than the simple GBOH system. What you're going to do here is you're going to take and look at the weapon system matrix that's on your chart, and the knights, when they shock attack a light cavalry, get a +3 modifier. So we're going to throw that into the mix. There's going to be a modifier if you have more than one unit attacking at a time, but with any kind of charge, you're only ever attacking one unit at a time. So we don't worry about that. There's no terrain effects here. Attacker is not disordered. The only other modifier that is going to apply to this shock attack is going to be the +1 shock defense modifier on the counter itself. So it's going to be +3 for the two different weapon systems clashing, and then +1 more for the defending unit's modifier. So it's going to be a +4 to the attacker. And because it's a charge, there's two different shock tables. There's shock combat results, and then there's charge combat results. So we're going to actually use the charge combat results, which is a little bit more devastating. And he rolls a die, and he rolls a 3, which is modified by 4, so it becomes a 7. And on the charge table results, the defender is disordered and retreats 1 hex. So he goes back, and we flip him over. And then the knight must advance and can freely change his facing. Also, unlike simple GBOH or the GBOH system, the retreating unit may freely change its facing. So facing is done very, very loosely in this game. In fact, you don't even have to move into your frontal hex. So let's say I start moving with a second Turkoman unit here. I can actually move him around like this, and no problem. I don't have to adjust the facing until he's done moving. So as soon as he's done moving, whether he's forced to because he's entered a Zoc, or he runs out of movement points, at that point I adjust his facing. So facing's done really loose in the game. Now, because this knight countercharged once, he cannot countercharge again. If this knight started in the zone of control of a enemy unit at the start of that enemy unit's activation, it may not countercharge. So let's say that one of these knights, for whatever reason, was positioned like this at the start of Sakman's activation. If that were the case, he would immediately, before Sakman moves any of his units, be marked with a countercharge marker to show that he cannot commit a countercharge during that activation. So here's where this is going to hurt this particular knight. Because he impetuously countercharged, yeah, he damaged that Turkoman unit, but now he's easy meat for the other Turkoman units. So this guy here, he's going to move up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then he's going to adjust his facing like so, because you can only fire through your frontal hexes here with these cavalry. I'd have to double check that. Actually, that might not be true. I think they might be able to fire through the flanks, but the problem is I played ZBOH and this system, so I'd have to look that up. Anyways, he's going to actually fire at the knight here. He rolls a die. It's a 7, modified by +1 because he is adjacent to him. -1 because he's a mounted archer, and -1 again because he's firing at a knight. So it's a net of -1. That becomes a 6. And a 6 on the missile table will cause a mounted unit that's not already flipped over and disordered to become disordered. So now this knight is kind of in a bad way. Now here's the thing about disorder. A unit can be in one of 3 states. It can be in good order, in which case it's not disordered. It can be disordered, in which case its movement rating is decreased and its firepower is also decreased. There's a -1 modifier to try to fire your missiles if you are in a disordered state. Third state a unit could be in is also, looking for the marker here, retired. And I don't mean by moving to Arizona retired. There's a marker that you put on the unit that shows that they are I can't find the marker here in the vassal module. It's usually on the back of these shock markers, but I'm not seeing it here. Maybe if I status, no. Well, I'll tell you what. For our purposes, we'll just highlight the unit to show that he is retired. But that's what would happen. The next state, if something else bad happens to this knight, he's either going to die outright, or he will become retired and will move immediately to the standard for that particular army. So if this particular knight were to retire, he would have to move to the army's standard in that hex, if possible, or an adjacent hex. So that's the 3 different states that a unit can be in as a result of combat. So I'm going to have to save the recording at this moment, so give me just a sec.